how many of you today are in love? It's kind of that time of year. Come on, Valentine's Day is what, this Friday? Who's in love? Put your hands up. Okay, that's a little bit of a trick question because everyone really should be. You know, my Valentine's Day, I have always chosen to ask myself one very important question. It's not about who I love, but it really is about what I love. And there's something about the pure sugar of candy hearts that always gets me thinking, for good or for bad. And I like to dwell on what I love. I like to dwell on those things that really inspire me to do what I do in my life and why those things are important to me. What I love has really led me on an incredible journey that I hope to share with you a little bit here tonight. But broadly speaking, as Joan mentioned, it's led me to found my own healthcare technology company called CyberDoctor. And I'm also fortunate enough to be the chair of another project called the Science Runway, which is really about teaching women in science how to reach out, how to find role models, and really educate themselves on the different areas of science. And so I guess that question also poses two really other big questions. Well, first, how do you find what you love? Much like finding a partner in life, this can be a difficult process. How do you go about that, and how do you really make that work? And then the second question is, how do you know it's real? How do you know it's the kind of love that can motivate you and keep you going for the rest of your life? So the first thing that I fell in love with that really changed my journey and drove me in life and brought me to entrepreneurship was science. And I don't know how many of you in the room had a similar experience when you began your scientific careers, but I can pinpoint the exact moment I knew I was going to be a scientist, and come hell or high water, that was what I was determined to do. And I was about 7 years old. We had 1 hour of science education a week at a very small private school in the middle of rural Pennsylvania, 1 hour of science education a week. And the first time my teacher came in, she said, "Did you know that there's different ecosystems in the world?" And I thought about it, and I had already had some grasp of that. But then she told us about the Arctic tundra. And I remember it very clearly because she said, "It's so cold that you could not survive for a minute out there. There are bacterial organisms that can survive and thrive out there." I remember thinking, that is so incredible that an environment can have that kind of impact, that an organism can thrive in that sense. And so, being the budding scientist I was, I spent the rest of the year collecting the playground in my desk to see whether there were organisms that would only survive in that environment. My teacher was not a huge fan of me by the end of the year, and I never understood why. And so I pursued that passion. I followed it through in high school through some difficult chemistry teachers, and ended up falling in love with something else along the way, and that was my business education classes that I was fortunate enough to go to high school that had. But I really started to understand that environment and gain a little bit of acceptance and knowledge for sort of how the business ecosystem works in a very minuscule way. Again, drove my teachers crazy. I decided that because no venture capitalists would fund my amazing mailbox closer idea, I would get local businesses to support me because I went to a local high school and it was a tax break for them. So that was a lot of fun. It was my first entrepreneurship experience. But like a lot of things you do at that age, I think I discounted it and I think I forgot about it. And so I went away to college and I focused on science, and I finished up a degree in neuroscience, did some really great work in research that I'm still proud of, and went on to work at the National Institutes of Health. And that was sort of where the light bulb went off for me, and I said, actually, I want to be on the other side of this bench, and I want to be doing something a little different. That was when I started to get a little bit more focused in terms of entrepreneurship and healthcare. And through part of that process, I reached out to some of the resources in my community at the NIH, and I think we heard about the resources that USCF has to offer just a minute ago. But those resources are really good. They really are sort of undervalued, I think, within the scientific community, but when you go outside of that, it really helps you. I still remember I took a tech transfer class through the Office of Technology Transfer for NIH, and it was this night class. It was 3 hours. It killed me every time I had to go, but I really learned a lot from that class. We formed a group, we formed a market plan around a therapeutic drug, and I said, hey, that's actually where my drive is at, and that's what I want to do. And so I think that's something important that I learned, that you have to take the chance and you have to commit the time to explore what you love too. And I think as scientists, exploring that love, if you have any love or interest in sort of business and entrepreneurship, you're in the best position possible to pursue that. And I know I'm getting some skeptical looks, but you really are, and here's my case for why. So I believe that scientists are very uniquely positioned to be the most brilliant and the most hardworking entrepreneurs out there. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why education, particularly scientific education, is so important to entrepreneurship. There are a couple bullets on here, and I actually just wrote about 6 more for Forbes last week, but the first one is really that in science we have this notion of this big picture understanding, but we focus on the small details. So think about the last paper, the last grant you wrote. You open up with this broad statement in your introductory paragraph, and then you narrow it down in the methods to, I will be investigating this particular cellular structure with this particular chemical, and then you go back out, and you want to persuade the person to fund you, so you're talking about the enormity, the scale, the massive things that this could potentially do for all of humanity, for all of the human body, whatever it happens to be. But scientific writing trains us to think about things in that scale, to go from the big picture to the small details. In entrepreneurship, we have to do the exact same thing on a daily basis. I have to sell a product and focus in on those details of that product that makes the user engagement that much more interesting, that much more alive, and really captivates and engages the people who work with our product. But at the same time, I can't lose the big picture for that. I can't have my programmer spend 7 hours of work time on a little button and forget about the fact that we have a deadline in 3 hours. You have to learn how to balance those things, and I actually think that scientific writing and that kind of curriculum has trained me to think about that in a better way. You can think of it as a stretch for your brain that works very much in the same way when you catapult it over in entrepreneurship. The second part of this, and I think one of the really important ones, is that experiments are not new or scary. You're used to failing. And I mean this in the best way possible. Every single one of us has run that PCR reaction that we forget the DNTPs in and it doesn't work. And we sit there and we go, what happened? I waited 25 minutes for this gel to run and there's nothing on it. Well, welcome to entrepreneurship. You will do that every day as an entrepreneur. I did it today. You know, you put the reaction together, you think it's going to work, and it doesn't really work out. But you're trained to understand that. You're trained to move on and say, hey, that's what went wrong, that was the missing ingredient, and next time, I'm not going to forget the DNTPs, at least not the next 5 times. And so you learn from that. You're used to failing, and that really trains you in a very unique and wonderful way for the journey of entrepreneurship. Going off of that determination, it's the same sort of thing. You're willing to walk into a research lab every single day and try the same sorts of experiments because you believe in it, because you believe in that final overwhelming purpose of what you're trying to do, and you're willing to take something for it. And then lastly, discipline. And so the second mentor I had in science, one morning I got into work and he said, and this might have been where the straw broke for me and I moved away from research, but he said, you know, our robo PCR thing broke and we, you know, need to get these PCRs done. And so I was sitting there doing literally 400 of them in one morning. Somewhere along that long 5-hour sojourn where my fingers were cramping, I realized that I might be learning something important. And I can't tell you, we just had our launch of our new product in October. And the whole week before, it was nonstop. It was working beyond human limitations and just kind of getting up every morning and saying, I have to put on a good face for the press. I have to, you know, do everything. And my app actually is not yet in the App Store. We have 6 kinds of disasters going on behind the scene. But I think that kind of rigor and discipline, that really science, those hours of study, those hours of sort of research, and those hours of just burning the midnight oil in a laboratory really teach you about how to handle that. And so I think it really is the education of a lifetime to become an entrepreneur. And I would really urge everyone to kind of think about that. If it's what you love, if you love to create, if you love to develop, if you love to build things, those are all sort of the things that I loved when I became an entrepreneur. And I think those are really the things that drive you and really make a difference. And so I wanted to kind of, not necessarily end with this, but just kind of say this, and then I really wanted questions and sort of wanted to be able to talk to everyone's specific concerns and thoughts and questions and whatever else I may have not mentioned. But this is my all-time favorite quote. And I think there's really something meaningful about it. The idea really has been that this defines you as a human being, and I think especially an entrepreneurial journey, it really does define you. You fall in love with your company the same way that you're all in love with science, in love with what you've done so far. And it really does define everything about your life. And so that would be my one maybe word of caution. If you do choose to do entrepreneurship, realize that anything that you've held as a stagnant, anything you've held as a constant, it will all be stretched. It will all go out the window. And if you really want it, it's worth it, the same way your scientific careers are worth it to you today. So with that, I want to open up a little bit to questions and see what else people might want me to talk about or